It was supposed to be just another blind date, another polite smile across another restaurant table, another chance for someone to prove that they cared more about a man's heart than the size of his bank account. But by the time the afternoon sun disappeared behind the city skyline, one unexpected meeting with a humble waitress would shatter years of carefully built emotional walls. She would unknowingly pass a test she never knew existed, and the millionaire sitting across from her would finally discover that the greatest treasures in life could never be counted in dollars. Sometimes the people who have everything are secretly searching for the one thing money has never been able to buy, a heart that loves without conditions. Before we continue, if you believe kindness is stronger than wealth and that true love still exists in today's world, please take a moment to like this video, comment below where you're watching from, share this story with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Journey of Kindness for more emotional stories that remind us the world still has good people. The morning sun poured through the enormous glass windows of Adrian Mercer's lakeside mansion, filling every room with warm golden light. From the outside, everything about his life looked perfect. The luxurious home overlooked calm blue water. Luxury cars rested neatly inside a spotless garage. Gardeners carefully trimmed colorful flowers that surrounded the property, while security cameras silently watched every entrance. Business magazines frequently listed Adrian among the country's youngest self-made millionaires. Television interviews praised his brilliant business strategies, and newspapers often described him as one of the most successful entrepreneurs of his generation. But inside those beautiful walls lived a man carrying a loneliness that no amount of money had ever managed to erase. Every morning followed the same quiet routine. Adrian woke before sunrise, prepared breakfast for his 7-year-old son Rowan, packed his school lunch himself, and walked him to the front gate where the school bus arrived each weekday. Those simple moments were the happiest part of his day because they reminded him of the promise he had made to his late wife. 3 years earlier, Naomi Mercer had smiled through unimaginable pain as cancer slowly stole her strength. During her final weeks, she never complained about what she was losing. Instead, she worried only about the 2 boys she loved most, her husband and their little son. Holding Adrian's trembling hand in the hospital room, she had whispered that no matter what happened, Rowan must always grow up surrounded by kindness instead of sadness. Adrian had promised her through tears that he would never allow their son to feel abandoned. Since that heartbreaking day, Adrian had dedicated every spare moment to keeping that promise. Despite managing companies worth hundreds of millions of dollars, he never missed school plays, soccer games, parent-teacher meetings, or bedtime stories. His employees admired him not only because he was successful but because he always left important meetings early whenever Rowan needed him. To the business world, Adrian was a fearless leader. To Rowan, he was simply Dad. Still, every evening after Rowan fell asleep, the enormous mansion became painfully silent. Adrian often wandered into Naomi's art room, where unfinished paintings still rested against the walls exactly as she had left them. Her favorite paintbrush remained inside a ceramic cup beside the window. Sometimes he would sit there for hours, staring at the sunset over the lake, wondering why achieving every professional dream had done nothing to heal the emptiness inside his heart. Friends insisted he deserved happiness again. Business partners constantly introduced him to accomplished women they believed would be perfect companions. Family members gently encouraged him to move forward. Eventually, Adrian agreed to try dating again. At first, everything seemed promising. The women he met were intelligent, attractive, and charming. They complimented his success, admired his luxurious lifestyle, and eagerly accepted invitations to elegant restaurants overlooking the city skyline. But as weeks turned into months, Adrian noticed a pattern that became impossible to ignore. Whenever conversations turned toward his businesses, expensive vacations, or luxury properties, their interest noticeably increased. Some casually joked about shopping trips using his credit cards. Others became fascinated with celebrity parties and private jets before they had even learned Rowan's name. A few openly admitted they had always dreamed of marrying someone wealthy enough to give them the life they believed they deserved. None of them asked about Naomi. Very few asked about Rowan. Almost nobody wondered how a widowed father truly felt after losing the love of his life. One rainy evening, Adrian returned home after another disappointing dinner date and found Rowan asleep on the living room couch, still holding a framed family photograph. The little boy had quietly fallen asleep waiting for his father to come home. Adrian gently carried him upstairs, kissed his forehead, and looked at the picture still resting in Rowan's tiny hands. In that moment, Adrian realized something painful. He no longer feared being alone. He feared allowing the wrong person into his son's life. The following morning, he made an unusual decision. If people truly wanted to know him, they would first meet the ordinary man instead of the millionaire. From that day forward, every blind date followed the same simple plan. Adrian left his designer suits inside the closet and wore faded jeans, old sneakers, and comfortable hooded jackets. Instead of arriving in luxury cars, he borrowed an aging pickup truck from one of his longtime employees. He introduced himself as a freelance computer repair technician who earned enough to support his son but nothing more. He never lied about being widowed or raising Rowan alone. The only secret he kept was the fortune he had spent years building. The results were heartbreaking. Some women politely ended the evening early after hearing about his modest income. Others offered forced smiles that slowly disappeared once they realized expensive vacations were probably impossible. One even laughed kindly before explaining she wanted someone with bigger ambitions. Another suggested he should focus on becoming financially successful before thinking about serious relationships. Adrian never argued. He simply thanked them for their honesty and wished them well. Although each rejection stung, it confirmed that his unusual experiment was revealing truths money usually kept hidden. Months passed. Nearly 20 blind dates came and went. Each disappointment quietly strengthened Adrian's belief that genuine love had become almost impossible to find. Even Rowan began noticing his father's growing sadness. One Saturday morning while eating pancakes together, the little boy looked up innocently and asked whether adults ever stopped missing people they loved. Adrian smiled gently despite the tears threatening to form. He explained that the people we truly love never completely leave us because pieces of them continue living inside our memories, our choices, and our hearts. Rowan nodded thoughtfully before saying something that stayed with Adrian for days. He quietly said that maybe someday someone kind would help both of them smile the way mommy used to. Adrian hugged his son tightly. Neither of them realized how close that day actually was. The following Thursday afternoon, Adrian received another phone call from his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Holloway. She excitedly explained that her niece knew a wonderful young woman who worked at a small neighborhood diner. According to everyone who knew her, she was hardworking, humble, compassionate, and completely uninterested in wealth or social status. Adrian smiled politely. He had heard similar descriptions many times before. Still, he agreed to one final blind date. Not because he expected anything different, but because Rowan had reminded him that hope only disappeared when people stopped giving it another chance. Wearing his usual faded hoodie and driving the same old pickup truck, Adrian headed toward the little family-owned diner on the edge of town. The warm afternoon sunshine filled the streets as families enjoyed parks, children rode bicycles along sidewalks, and local shop owners greeted familiar customers with cheerful smiles. Adrian had no idea that this ordinary daytime visit would become the turning point not only in his own life, but in the lives of everyone he loved. The blind date never arrived. Instead, fate had prepared someone else. Adrian sat quietly at the corner booth, occasionally glancing toward the diner's entrance before checking his watch again. Nearly 45 minutes had passed since the agreed meeting time, and deep inside, he already knew what had happened. His blind date had either changed her mind or decided that meeting an ordinary computer repairman simply wasn't worth the effort. Surprisingly, he didn't feel angry anymore. Months earlier, another rejection would have left him frustrated, but now there was only a familiar emptiness. He smiled politely when the elderly waitress apologized for the delay, assuring her that everything was fine. He ordered nothing more than a cup of black coffee, watching the busy lunchtime crowd fill the small family restaurant with cheerful conversations and laughter. The diner was unlike the expensive restaurants Adrian usually visited for business meetings. There were no crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling or violin music filling the room. Instead, old country songs played softly from a vintage radio near the kitchen. The walls displayed faded photographs of families who had been loyal customers for decades. A handwritten chalkboard proudly announced the day's homemade specials, and every table held a tiny vase with fresh wildflowers picked that morning. The place felt warm, welcoming, and wonderfully ordinary. It reminded Adrian of the neighborhood cafe where he and Naomi had shared breakfast every Sunday before success transformed their lives into endless meetings and international flights. As he slowly stirred his untouched coffee, his attention was drawn toward a young waitress moving gracefully between crowded tables. She wasn't rushing despite the busy afternoon. Instead, every customer seemed to receive her full attention. She smiled sincerely rather than professionally, listened patiently to elderly guests who wanted to share stories, and somehow remembered everyone's favorite meals without writing anything down. There was something calm about the way she carried herself, as though kindness came naturally instead of being part of her job. Her name tag read Marisol Bennett. She looked no older than 29. Her dark hair was tied neatly into a simple bun, and although long hours had left faint signs of exhaustion beneath her eyes, they still reflected remarkable warmth. She wore no expensive jewelry except a small silver bracelet that appeared old and carefully repaired. Her uniform was spotless despite the constant movement between tables, and she greeted every customer with the same genuine respect regardless of how they were dressed. Adrian continued observing quietly as one touching moment after another unfolded before him. An elderly man accidentally knocked over his cup of coffee, spilling it across the table and onto the floor. Embarrassed, he immediately began apologizing while struggling to stand. Before anyone else could react, Marisol hurried over, gently placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. She smiled warmly, insisting accidents happened every day and that he should remain comfortably seated while she cleaned everything herself. There was no trace of irritation in her voice. Instead, she joked softly until the man laughed at himself again. Within minutes the table looked untouched, and the embarrassed customer was smiling with relief. Only a few minutes later, a tired young mother entered carrying a sleeping baby while trying to calm two energetic little boys. One child accidentally dropped his juice onto the floor before they had even ordered. Other customers turned to look, but Marisol immediately knelt beside the frightened little boy and assured him that nothing terrible had happened. She cleaned the spill, brought fresh juice without charging for it, and quietly handed both boys homemade cookies while whispering that every superhero needed energy for important adventures. The children's worried faces instantly lit up with excitement. Adrian couldn't stop watching. These weren't grand gestures designed to impress anyone. No cameras were recording. No manager stood nearby evaluating employee performance. Marisol simply treated people with extraordinary compassion because that was who she was. When she finally approached Adrian's booth, her smile was just as genuine as it had been with every other customer. She apologized sincerely that his guest hadn't arrived and gently asked whether he would like another cup of coffee while he waited. Adrian smiled politely and admitted he wasn't waiting anymore. Something in his calm voice caught her attention. Years of serving customers had quietly taught Marisol how to recognize different kinds of sadness. Some people carried stress. Others carried anger. But the loneliness she saw in Adrian's eyes felt much deeper. It reminded her of people who had experienced losses they never fully spoke about. Without asking uncomfortable questions, she simply nodded with understanding. A few minutes later she returned carrying a generous slice of homemade apple pie. Adrian looked surprised. He smiled and explained that he hadn't ordered dessert. Marisol laughed softly before telling him the baker had accidentally prepared one extra slice and insisted someone should enjoy it before closing time. The truth was different. There had been no extra pie. She had quietly paid for it herself. Adrian thanked her sincerely and reached for his wallet, but Marisol gently shook her head. She explained that sometimes the best meals were the unexpected ones. Those simple words settled deep inside Adrian's heart. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had offered him something without expecting something in return. For the first time in months, he slowly enjoyed every bite of dessert while watching the peaceful life unfolding inside the little diner. Before leaving, Adrian placed enough money on the table to cover his meal and a generous tip. As he walked toward the exit, he noticed something unusual. Instead of putting the tip into her apron, Marisol quietly slipped part of it into the jar marked Community Meal Fund near the register. Curious, Adrian paused outside the window. The elderly cashier noticed his interest and stepped outside while taking a short break. When Adrian politely asked about the jar, the woman smiled proudly. She explained that Marisol had started the fund almost 2 years earlier after noticing that some elderly customers skipped meals because they couldn't afford them. Every week she secretly donated part of her own paycheck, and whenever tips were especially generous, she added more. The money was never used for herself. It simply allowed struggling families, lonely seniors, or homeless visitors to receive hot meals without embarrassment. Adrian stood speechless. The cashier continued smiling. She admitted that nobody knew exactly how Marisol managed financially because she already worked double shifts nearly every day. Only later did Adrian learn why. Marisol had been raising her younger brother, Eli, ever since their parents passed away in separate accidents only 2 years apart. She had abandoned her dream of becoming an elementary school teacher so her teenage brother could continue attending school. Every extra dollar she earned helped pay rent, buy groceries, cover medical appointments, and slowly build a college savings account for Eli's future. Despite carrying responsibilities that would overwhelm many people twice her age, she never complained. She simply kept working, kept smiling, kept helping others. Driving home that afternoon, Adrian couldn't stop thinking about her. Not because she was beautiful, although she certainly was. Not because she had shown him kindness. But because none of her kindness had been motivated by knowing who he really was. She believed he was nothing more than a lonely single father with an ordinary job. And yet she had treated him with more compassion than many wealthy acquaintances had shown him in years. That evening Rowan noticed something different about his father almost immediately. For the first time in a long while, Adrian smiled during dinner without forcing it. As they ate homemade spaghetti together, Rowan asked whether the blind date had gone well. Adrian laughed quietly. He admitted the date had never shown up. Rowan looked disappointed for only a moment before noticing the peaceful expression on his father's face. Then Adrian told him about the waitress. He described the little diner, the apple pie, the way she cared for strangers, and the quiet generosity she showed without expecting praise. Rowan listened carefully before grinning. He asked one simple question. Are you going back? Adrian paused. Then he smiled. I think I am. Neither father nor son realized that this small decision would become the beginning of a journey neither of them could have imagined. A journey where trust would be tested, hidden truths would come to light, and two wounded hearts would slowly discover that sometimes the greatest miracles begin with nothing more than a slice of homemade pie served by someone who still believed kindness could change the world. Over the next several weeks, the little diner became a regular part of Adrian's routine. At first, he convinced himself he was simply stopping by because he enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere. It felt different from the high-pressure boardrooms and luxury restaurants that dominated most of his life. But deep down, he knew the real reason. Every visit gave him a chance to see Marisol again. He always arrived during the daytime after dropping Rowan at school or finishing morning meetings. Sometimes he sat in the same corner booth and worked quietly on his laptop. Other times he simply enjoyed a meal while observing the warm community that seemed to form naturally around Marisol. The more he watched her, the more impressed he became. What amazed Adrian most was her consistency. Many people were kind when life was going well. Many people were generous when others were watching. But Marisol remained compassionate even when she was exhausted. One busy afternoon, the diner was overflowing with customers. Orders were delayed, the kitchen was struggling to keep up, and several customers were becoming impatient. Adrian watched as one frustrated businessman harshly criticized Marisol for a mistake that wasn't even hers. The man raised his voice loudly enough for nearby. The more he watched her, the more impressed he became. What amazed Adrian most was her consistency. Many people were kind when life was going well. Many people were generous when others were watching. But Marisol remained compassionate even when she was exhausted. One busy afternoon, the diner was overflowing with customers. Orders were delayed, the kitchen was struggling to keep up, and several customers were becoming impatient. Adrian watched as one frustrated businessman harshly criticized Marisol for a mistake that wasn't even hers. The man raised his voice loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Most employees would have responded defensively or called a manager. Marisol simply listened. She apologized sincerely even though she wasn't responsible. Then she personally ensured the customer's meal was corrected. 10 minutes later, when the same man accidentally left his phone behind, she ran 2 blocks down the street to return it before he drove away. The businessman looked stunned. Adrian was too. That level of grace was rare. Very rare. Meanwhile, Rowan continued hearing stories about the waitress from the diner. Each evening, Adrian found himself mentioning something new. How she remembered elderly customers' birthdays. How she secretly bought school supplies for struggling children. How she always found time to encourage people who seemed discouraged. Eventually, Rowan became curious. One Friday afternoon, Adrian decided to bring his son along. The diner was quieter than usual when they arrived. Sunlight streamed through the large front windows, creating warm patterns across the wooden floors. As soon as Marisol noticed Rowan standing beside Adrian, her face brightened. She knelt to his eye level and introduced herself naturally, without treating him like a child who needed entertaining. Within minutes, she was helping him solve a puzzle printed on the children's menu. When Rowan proudly showed her his answer, she celebrated his success as if he had won an important competition. The little boy immediately liked her. As the afternoon passed, Adrian noticed something touching. Marisol never tried to impress Rowan. She didn't shower him with gifts. She didn't force conversations. She simply listened. And for a child who had lost his mother, being genuinely listened to meant everything. When they finally left, Rowan couldn't stop talking. He described her as the nicest grown-up besides Dad. For Adrian, that simple statement carried enormous meaning. As the weeks passed, friendship slowly grew between them. Their conversations became longer, more personal, more meaningful. Instead of discussing superficial topics, they talked about life. They shared childhood memories, favorite books, dreams they once had, regrets they still carried. One afternoon, while sitting outside the diner during her short break, Marisol revealed how her life had changed after losing both parents. She spoke calmly, but Adrian could hear the pain beneath her words. At 20 years old, she had suddenly become responsible for raising her younger brother. Friends were attending university and building careers while she worked long shifts to keep food on the table. There were nights when she cried herself to sleep from exhaustion. Months when she wasn't sure how rent would be paid. Moments when giving up seemed easier than continuing. Yet somehow she always found the strength to move forward. Not because she was fearless, but because Eli depended on her. Listening to her story, Adrian felt humbled. Many people saw challenges and became bitter. Marisol had seen tragedy and somehow become kinder. When she eventually asked about his own life, Adrian told the truth about Naomi. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough. He described the woman he had loved. The battle with cancer. The devastating goodbye. The promise he made beside her hospital bed. For several moments, neither spoke. Marisol simply listened. There were no empty cliches. No forced optimism. Only quiet understanding. It was exactly what Adrian needed. From that day forward, something changed. The walls around his heart began to crack. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just little by little. For the first time since Naomi's death, he found himself looking forward to the future instead of merely surviving the present. But while Adrian was slowly learning to trust again, another struggle was growing inside him. Guilt. Every smile they shared was built upon a secret. Every conversation carried an omission. Marisol believed she knew who he was. But she only knew part of the truth. The larger his feelings became, the heavier the deception felt. Several times he almost told her everything. He imagined explaining why he had hidden his wealth. Why he pretended to be an ordinary repairman. Why years of disappointment had made him afraid. Yet fear always stopped him. What if revealing the truth changed everything? What if she looked at him differently afterward? What if the connection they had built disappeared? So he remained silent. Unfortunately, secrets rarely stay hidden forever. One bright Saturday morning, Adrian received an invitation to a large community charity event organized by one of his companies. The event would provide free school supplies, scholarships, and support services for local families. Thousands of people were expected to attend. News reporters would be present. Community leaders would give speeches. Adrian normally avoided public appearances whenever possible. But this event was important. He wanted Rowan to attend. Then an idea occurred to him. He invited Marisol and Eli. He carefully explained that he had received extra community tickets and thought they might enjoy the family activities. Marisol happily accepted. To her, it sounded like a simple daytime outing. Nothing more. The day arrived under clear blue skies. Families filled the large park. Children laughed while playing games. Volunteers distributed food and supplies. Live music echoed across the open fields. Everything seemed perfect. until they reached the main entrance. The moment Adrian stepped through the gates, people began recognizing him. Executives hurried over. Employees greeted him enthusiastically. Security staff nodded respectfully. Several reporters immediately turned toward him. And directly above the stage hung an enormous banner. Adrian Mercer Foundation Community Day. Marisol stopped walking. Her eyes moved from the banner to Adrian. Then back again. Confusion appeared first. Then disbelief. Then heartbreak. The truth had finally found them. And in that painful moment, Adrian realized that the hardest conversation of his life was about to begin. Marisol felt as though the world around her had suddenly gone silent. The cheerful music, the laughter of children, the conversations filling the park, all of it faded into the background as she stared at the enormous banner displaying Adrian's name. Employees greeted him with respect, executives eagerly shook his hand, and volunteers thanked him for making the entire event possible. The man she believed repaired computers for a modest living was clearly someone far more important. She looked back at Adrian, searching his face for an explanation. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. The truth was standing all around them. Adrian slowly lowered his eyes. Every fear he had carried for months had finally become reality. He wanted to explain everything immediately, but every carefully prepared sentence disappeared the moment he saw the disappointment in Marisol's eyes. It wasn't anger. It was hurt. The quiet hurt that comes when someone you trust keeps a part of themselves hidden. Marisol didn't create a dramatic scene. She didn't accuse him in front of everyone or demand answers. Instead, she simply whispered that she needed some time to think. She gently took Eli's arm and walked away through the crowd. Adrian wanted to follow. Every instinct told him not to let her leave. But he understood she deserved space. That evening his beautiful mansion felt emptier than ever before. Rowan noticed immediately that something was wrong. His father barely touched dinner and spent most of the evening staring through the large living room windows toward the peaceful lake. Dad, did something bad happen? Rowan asked quietly. Adrian forced a small smile before sitting beside his son. He explained that sometimes good people made mistakes because they were afraid of getting hurt again. He admitted that he had hidden the truth from someone who deserved complete honesty. Rowan thought carefully before answering. My teacher says telling the truth late is still better than never telling it. Those innocent words stayed with Adrian all night. The following morning he wrote Marisol a long handwritten letter. He didn't defend himself. He didn't mention his success. Instead, he apologized. He admitted that after losing Naomi, he no longer trusted people's intentions. Too many relationships had changed the moment women discovered his wealth. Pretending to be broke had become his way of protecting Rowan and himself from more disappointment. He ended the letter with one simple sentence. You deserved my trust long before you earned it, and I'm sorry I realized it too late. He left the letter with the diner manager. Days passed. There was no reply. Still Adrian continued visiting the diner, not expecting forgiveness but hoping for one chance to apologize face to face. Whenever he arrived, another waitress politely explained that Marisol was busy in the kitchen or had already finished her shift. She wasn't avoiding the customers. She was avoiding him. Meanwhile, Marisol struggled with emotions she couldn't easily explain. She wasn't upset because Adrian was wealthy. Money had never impressed her. What hurt was believing their friendship had been built on complete honesty when one important piece had always been missing. Still, every time she reread his letter, she could feel genuine regret in every line. She remembered the lonely widower who spoke lovingly about Naomi. The devoted father who never stopped talking proudly about Rowan. The quiet man who had listened to her dreams without judgment. Had any of that been fake? No. She knew it hadn't. That realization made forgiving him both easier and more difficult. Then life suddenly shifted in a way neither of them expected. Late one sunny afternoon, Eli was riding his bicycle home from college after completing an important scholarship interview. At a busy intersection, a distracted driver ran a red light. The collision sent Eli crashing onto the pavement. Within minutes, ambulances filled the street. Marisol received the phone call while serving lunch. She dropped everything and rushed to the hospital, terrified. Doctors quickly explained that Eli had suffered multiple fractures and internal injuries. He needed immediate surgery. Although the operation had an excellent chance of success, the estimated medical costs were overwhelming. Marisol sat alone in the hospital hallway, holding her brother's backpack against her chest as tears streamed silently down her face. For the first time in years, she didn't know what to do. One of the diner employees quietly called Adrian. He arrived less than 20 minutes later. Without saying a word, he sat beside Marisol. She looked surprised to see him. He didn't mention the past. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply stayed. When doctors requested signatures for emergency treatment, Adrian calmly handled every conversation with hospital administrators. Quietly, without telling Marisol, he arranged for the country's best orthopedic surgeon to fly in that evening. He instructed his financial office to cover every medical expense anonymously. No press releases. No publicity. No recognition. Only help. The surgery lasted nearly 6 hours. Adrian remained in the waiting room the entire time. He bought coffee for exhausted nurses. Comforted Eli's nervous classmates who had gathered outside. Even called Rowan to explain why he wouldn't be home until late, asking his trusted housekeeper to stay with him for the evening. Just before sunrise, the surgeon finally emerged with encouraging news. Eli would recover. The operation had been successful. Marisol broke down in tears of relief. Without thinking, she hugged Adrian tightly. For several moments neither of them spoke. Words weren't necessary. Over the following weeks, Adrian visited the hospital regularly. Sometimes he brought Rowan, who quickly became friends with Eli. Sometimes he simply sat quietly while Marisol caught up on much-needed sleep. One afternoon, while organizing paperwork for Eli's discharge, Marisol accidentally discovered the truth. Every hospital bill had already been paid. Every surgery. Every medication. Every rehabilitation appointment. She immediately asked the administrator who had covered the costs. The woman smiled. It was Mr. Mercer. He asked us never to tell you. Marisol stood frozen. She realized Adrian had never mentioned the money. Never expected gratitude. Never used his wealth to impress her. He had simply helped because someone she loved was in pain. That evening she visited the lake house for the first time. The setting sun painted the water with shades of gold and orange. Adrian was sitting alone on the dock when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned. Marisol smiled softly. I finally understand. Adrian looked confused. She sat beside him. You didn't hide your money because you were proud of it. She paused. You hid it because you were afraid no one would ever love you without it. For the first time in years, Adrian allowed himself to be completely honest. He admitted everything. His fears. His loneliness. His mistakes. His guilt. He confessed that pretending to be poor had protected his fortune but had also prevented people from truly knowing him. Marisol listened quietly before taking his hand. We all protect ourselves after heartbreak, she said softly. The important thing is deciding when someone has earned the truth. That evening marked a new beginning. Not because every problem disappeared, but because there were no more secrets. Over the next 2 years, life slowly healed everyone involved. Eli graduated at the top of his engineering class and accepted a position designing affordable hearing technology for children with disabilities. With Adrian's encouragement, but entirely through her own hard work, Marisol finally fulfilled the dream she had buried years earlier. She completed her teaching degree and opened a community learning center for children from struggling families. Adrian funded the building, but Marisol insisted the center remain focused on the children rather than the donors. She believed opportunity should never come with conditions. Rowan flourished. The sadness that had quietly followed him since Naomi's passing slowly gave way to laughter. Marisol never tried to replace his mother. Instead, she honored Naomi's memory by helping Rowan remember her with love instead of only grief. They celebrated Naomi's birthday every year by planting flowers around the lake. It became a family tradition. Several years later, during another beautiful daytime charity event in the same park where everything had almost fallen apart, Adrian stood beside Marisol as hundreds of families received school supplies and scholarships. This time there were no secrets. Only gratitude. Looking across the crowd, Adrian realized something extraordinary. People often believed he had rescued a hardworking waitress from a difficult life. The truth was exactly the opposite. Marisol had rescued a lonely widower from a life without hope. She reminded him that kindness was stronger than fear. That trust required courage. And that the richest life wasn't measured by the money someone earned, but by the love they freely gave. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, Share it with someone who still believes in genuine kindness. Leave a comment telling us what lesson stayed with you the most, and subscribe to Journey of Kindness for more stories that inspire hope and compassion. Special request. Before you go, please comment the single word, trust. Let's fill the comments with reminders that honesty and kindness can still change lives. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the lake, Adrian watched Rowan, Eli, and Marisol laughing together beneath the warm afternoon sky. He finally understood that the greatest blessing in his life had never been the fortune he built. It was finding someone who saw the man behind the wealth, the father behind the success, and the broken heart behind the smile. In the end, love didn't arrive dressed in luxury. It arrived wearing a waitress's apron, carrying a humble heart, and quietly proving that the most valuable people in the world are those who choose kindness even when life has given them every reason not to. And that was a treasure no amount of money could ever buy.